There is a version of you online. You built it carefully, and somewhere along the way, you started becoming it. You chose the photos. You chose the words. You decided what to share and what to leave out. And what you created does not feel fake. It feels like a more coherent version of yourself. Cleaner, more intentional. But the act of building that version did not just represent you. It started reshaping you. When did that happen? That question is harder to answer than it looks. Because the shift was not dramatic. There was no single moment where you decided to become someone else. No conscious turning point. No day you remember. It was incremental, almost invisible. A post that performed well. A tone that got more responses. A version of an opinion that landed better than the version you actually held. And you adjusted. Not dishonestly, just adaptively. Psychology has a name for what happens next. Two names, actually. The first comes from a study conducted in the late 1990s at Stanford University. Researchers Yee and Daryl Bem placed participants inside virtual reality environments and gave them avatars. Some avatars were tall, confident in posture. Others were shorter, more hunched. What they found was not just that people behaved differently while wearing the avatars. They behaved differently after taking them off. The avatar had changed something that persisted. Yee and Bailenson called this the Proteus Effect, named after the Greek god who could change his shape at will. The principle is deceptively simple. Your appearance changes your behavior, not just how others perceive you, how you perceive yourself. You do not need a virtual reality headset for this to happen to you. You have a profile. You have a filter you always use. You have a way of writing captions that is not quite how you talk. That is your avatar. And according to the Proteus Effect, it is already shaping how you think and feel and move through the world, not just online. The separation you assumed existed between your digital self and your actual self is less clean than it feels. Everywhere. But there is a second layer to this, and it goes deeper. In 1972, psychologist Daryl Bem proposed something that still makes people uncomfortable when they really sit with it. He called it self-perception theory. The conventional version of identity says this: you know who you are, and then you act accordingly. Bem said the opposite happens. You observe your own behavior, and from that observation, you infer who you are. You do not consult some deep internal source. You watch yourself the same way you would watch a stranger, and then you draw conclusions. So when you post a certain way, consistently, over months and years, you start to believe that is who you are. Not because you decided it, because you watched yourself do it. If this is making you slightly uncomfortable right now, that reaction is worth paying attention to. Not because it means something is wrong with you, because it means something landed. Subscribe. This is the kind of channel that rewards staying close. Now put those two things together. You build an online version of yourself. That is the Proteus Effect. You perform it consistently. And then, through self-perception theory, you begin to adopt it as evidence of who you are. The avatar shapes your behavior. Your behavior shapes your self-concept. Your self-concept reinforces the avatar. It is not manipulation. It is not deception. It is just how identity actually works when it has an audience. The audience does not even need to be large. It just needs to be there. And on social media, it is always there. The question is not whether this is happening to you. It is. The question is which version came first. Think about the tone you use on X. It is probably sharper than how you speak in person. More certain, more willing to take a hard position. Or the version of yourself on Instagram. More composed, more curated. The caption voice that is almost yours, but with the rough edges smoothed. Or the person you become in comment sections. Quicker to anger, quicker to dismiss, quicker to perform certainty you do not actually feel. None of those are fake. They are all you, but they are you under specific conditions. Conditions you created, and then forgot you created. Here is where it gets more complicated. Every version of you is, in some sense, a performance. The self you bring to work, the self you bring to family dinners, the self you bring to a first date. Context shapes behavior. That is not new. Sociologist Erving Goffman described it in 1959. We are all, always, performing for an audience. What is different about online identity is not the performance. It is the record. Your performance at a family dinner does not follow you around. Your online performance does. It accumulates. It becomes searchable. And because it persists, you start to manage it, consciously or not. And what you manage long enough, you start to believe. Not in a dramatic conversion. More quietly than that. The managed version just becomes the default. There is a term psychologists use for what comes next. Identity foreclosure. It describes what happens when the story you tell about yourself closes off other versions before they have a chance to exist. It is different from lying. It is different from pretending. It is more like arriving at yourself too early, locking in a character arc before the story is done. And the internet does not cause this. People have foreclosed on their identities long before social media existed. But it accelerates it. Because social media asks you, every single day, to be legible, to be consistent, to be the same person you were yesterday, or at least to not contradict them publicly. That is a strange kind of pressure. The pressure to remain yourself. Think about what happens when you change your mind about something publicly, or when you contradict something you said 6 months ago. The discomfort you feel is not just social. It is psychological, because the online record is also evidence you use to know who you are. Changing your mind publicly does not just risk your reputation with others. It destabilizes your own self-perception, which is why so many people do not change it publicly, even when they privately already have. The online self becomes a version you maintain out of inertia as much as conviction. Subscribe if you want to keep thinking about this kind of thing. There is something specific about the way this plays out depending on the platform. On Instagram, you perform a life. On X, you perform a mind. On TikTok, you perform a personality. The performances are different, but the mechanism underneath is the same. You build something that gets a response. The response reinforces the behavior. The behavior reinforces the identity. The identity builds the next version of what you post. At some point in that cycle, you stop choosing. You start executing. You stop asking whether the version of you online still reflects who you actually are. Because the feedback has been consistent for so long that the question no longer occurs to you. That is not a character flaw. That is just how cognition works under conditions of repetition. The brain stops questioning what it has confirmed enough times. It is not laziness. It is efficiency. The system is working exactly as designed. It just was not designed with your online identity in mind. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable part of all of this. The version of you online is not a distortion of who you are. At this point, for most people, it is evidence. The self-perception loop has been running long enough that what you built to represent you has become part of what you use to know yourself. Proteus and Bem converge here. The avatar shaped your behavior. Your behavior taught you who you are. And now the avatar and the self are no longer clearly separate. This is not a problem to solve. It is a condition to name. Because naming it is different from being subject to it without knowing. A process you can see is one you can, at minimum, choose to observe. And observation is the beginning of something. Most people who are subject to this process have never had it described back to them. They feel it, vaguely, the dissonance between who they are offline and who they have become online. But they do not have language for it, so they do not examine it. You now have language for it. The Proteus Effect, self-perception theory, identity foreclosure. 3 concepts, 1 process, and it has been running in the background of your life every time you opened an app and decided who to be. The question that remains is not whether you should delete your accounts. That is not what this is about. The question is whether the version of you that exists online was chosen, or whether it accumulated, whether it still reflects who you want to be, or whether it reflects who you were the last time you were paying close enough attention to decide. Most people, if they are honest, cannot answer that with much confidence. Not because they are confused, because they have not stopped long enough to ask. The platform does not reward pausing. It rewards posting. And that gap between the person you are and the person you perform is exactly the size of the distance you have stopped noticing. There is a version of you online. You built it carefully, and somewhere along the way, you stopped noticing the difference. If you want to keep thinking about this, there is more below.